I'm not a developer. I'm a mere lawyer. I don't build things. I make rather nice agreements, I like to think, but I don't actually make anything, so an apology. I'm trying to give a developer's overview of the PPA market and CFDs, how developers are feeling at the moment, the mood of the market. We act for a lot of developers. I talk to a lot more, and they're asking me a lot of questions. A lot of difficult questions, a lot of questions I can't answer. And I don't like that. I don't like the uncertainty. You probably don't like the uncertainty of where we are. But gradually, the detail is coming through. And I hope, after this short presentation, you can take away a little bit more reassurance, perhaps, as to what's out there, some of the detail which is bolstering the principles upon which the new CFD regime will be launched. And hopefully, within a year, if this talk is given again in a year's time, it'll all have settled down and we'll be moaning about something else. A quick overview to begin with of the PPA market. For those of you who've been involved in arranging a PPA, you'll know it isn't a straightforward exercise. We haven't got any off-the-shelf products at the moment. The off-taker of last resort product, which is going to be on the shelf in a few months' time, hopefully. Commoditized product, terrific. No negotiation, fantastic. No lawyers' fees, even better. Not a great product necessarily. Isn't it remarkable that this product's success is going to be the off-taker of last resort PPA, that the measure of the success of that product will be if nobody actually takes one up. It's there, just in passing, to keep the banks happy, to know that can be modelled as a last resort in order to get floor prices into their financial models. It will be a sad day indeed if any of you in the PPA market are forced and are left with no other choice but to go for the last resort PPA, £25 per hour megawatt hour discount. So that's in future, that's a helpful gesture, it could help financing, but it's not really where the value is. It's not going to keep equity happy, it's not going to keep you as developers happy. Who are the traditional players at the moment? Well, if you'd asked me that question 5 or 10 years ago, I would have said, of course, the big six. They're all quite eager. 2002, and I started doing RO renewable PPAs after the NOFO debacle. There were the usual players, and they remain. Some with greater appetite than others, it's fair to say. Not all the big six have the same appetite. And it's probably fair to say, generalizing madly, that you probably won't get your very best commercial offer from one of the big six off-takers. You'll get a very good covenant. That keeps the banks happy. Come on to that. But in terms of the commercial offer, it's unlikely to be your 100% of embedded benefits, etc., in order to maximize your returns. So you have the big six. You have, at the other end of the scale, some very active, innovative, smaller players, the likes of Good Energy, OVO, Opus, Smartest, now rather bigger than they were. Unusual players like Co-op, for instance, who are off the radar but are doing 1 or 2 deals. And that's an exciting proposition, particularly where you're going for the shorter term arrangement, and certainly if you don't have to keep banks happy. Where you have to keep the banks happy, then you need to come up with a rather heavyweight covenant or alternative security, and we'll come on to that. More recent entrants, well, it has changed. The last 3 years have seen a huge influx of interesting names into the market. Statkraft probably are at the top of the tree at the moment. They've written, I don't know, 80 or 90 PPAs, most of which have been financeable. And if the most important thing to you is getting a financeable PPA, then Statkraft almost certainly would be on your list. Whether they give you the best commercial terms is for you to decide. Inevitably, when you have achieved the position of a leader in the offtake market, and they are pretty much up there at the moment, inevitably people go to you, and if people come to you and you don't need to seek them out, your commercial terms naturally will be moderated to reflect that. Slightly newer, large entrants, Total, GDF, they're very well-known names, very good covenants, not so much renowned for their plays in the renewables market until recently. Total, I think, is the largest gas player in the country, but in terms of its power offtake, I think it must be down at 8 or 9. So again, 2 or 3 years ago, that name might not have been on the list. You've got exciting new entrants like Neas, for instance, and we'll hear from Lars later. And that's a very interesting play. You, Lars, have done it in another country, and now want to do it over here, bringing your experience over here. And in terms of covenant, I think, I can touch upon this. It may be a smallish company, I might be doing you down there, but you come with a bank covenant with the PPA, so as to provide covenant strength, and no doubt terrific commercial terms. Liquidity. Well, before going on to liquidity, there are unusual off-takers out there who wouldn't have appeared, I think, 3 years ago in a similar talk. You've got your, what might loosely be called end-user PPA off-takers. You've got the likes of supermarket chains. They're not off-takers as such. They're not electricity suppliers. They don't have a license in the main. But increasingly, they are doing or trying to do back-to-back deals, perhaps with a middleman supplier in the middle, so that they try and do, as far as possible, direct arrangement with generator in order to secure prices going forward and obviously to lock into a green supply. You've got government off-taking. A large scheme has been very much underwritten, or the PPA has been provided by the government, an interesting player as an energy consumer. I know of a bank, not as a financier, but as a bank as an energy consumer, that's going through a PPA auction at the moment. It's an extraordinary development. You wouldn't have seen that a couple of years ago. So the market is changing. In a month's time, it may have changed again. The issue, I think, one of the issues is liquidity. There may be lots of names I've mentioned there, and I certainly haven't mentioned all the names, but it is fair to say that if 1 or 2 or 3 of those dropped out, then the market would be pretty much shot to pieces. You've probably found that there are a couple of good offers. The appetite varies. It varies from time to time, and the worry would be that any one of those names that I've mentioned will say, our book is full, we've had enough now, thank you, let somebody else take over. Just a change of heart, change of mind, and the PPA market then will falter. And we've had a number of examples of that over the last few years. And just as a reminder, before we go on to CFDs is the hedge instrument to top you up from reference price to strike. But a CFD is not a PPA. You will still need a PPA in the brave new world of CFDs. For those of you who are not aware of that, it's a really important point. You'll need a PPA negotiation. You'll need your flexible arrangements on price or fixed price or whatever you want. You'll need your good covenant. You'll need your power to be looked after under a PPA, even if you have a CFD. A CFD is just an insurance instrument that tops you up to make sure that you know or have a better sense of what you're getting for selling your power. Financeability, horrible word, but a really important word. It's probably a great frustration to many developers here that in collecting together PPA offers, you've had some terrific terms offered, and you run along excitedly to your bank and say, look what we've got, this is great, isn't it? We've done the model, look how it works up, look at the returns. And the bank says, very nice indeed. We're not really sure about the covenant here, and where's the floor price? Covenant strength, what do I mean by covenant strength? Well, the traditional bank approach would be to look at the Standard & Poor or Moody's rating for an off-taker, and perhaps the opening bank position would be that the off-taker's rating should be BBB plus S&P. That's the opening position. Who knows where you'll get to? Many off-takers are not prepared to offer such a high rating. That's the trigger rating. Many of them have a higher rating beyond that, but we're talking here about the rating below which, at or below which, alternative credit support needs to be provided. And normally there's a long debate around whether it should be BBB plus, BBB minus is the absolute rock bottom that a bank would be prepared to go to. Other tests of substance and covenant strength, net assets, obviously. If you're not rated, that's a bit unfortunate, but if you've got very substantial net assets, then that can tick the box in a different way, and some off-takers really play very hard on that. And a rather softer field is really the volume of renewable megawatts that you've secured as an off-taker in the UK market to show that you're here to stay, you're of substance, and that you're not going to fly off before the project is finished. Some current trends in the market, just very briefly before moving on. It's just to give a mood of the market. PPA term, the duration of the PPA. There's wild variation at the moment in what developers and financiers are looking for. So I can't say to you the magic number is 10 years or 15 years or whatever. It's an extraordinary variation. We're seeing a polarization, I think, between very long term, so as to cover the tenor of the debt and a bit beyond. So certainly 10 years, more likely 12 to 15. And they are available from the major off-takers. Right down to major equity players saying, no, we don't want to tie up for that length of time. We recognize that there is a cost in signing up a 15-year PPA. We don't like the commercial terms we're getting over such a length of time, and we're going to take a gamble on taking a much shorter PPA, 18 months, 2 years, whatever, perhaps conveniently linking into March 2017. And just taking a view, taking a bit of a punt, that when that time comes, we can do better with the greater certainty that should be in the market at that time. Now, there's a risk involved in that, but I'm just communicating that there isn't a set position, there isn't a right answer. Very much in balance. The perfect position, of course, for you as a developer is getting the best of both worlds. So you get a long-term PPA with some lovely break rights after 2 or 3 years, and you have the perpetual rolling option to break and to renew. Difficult conversation to have with your off-taker. Unfortunately, they've got a book to balance, and it's very difficult for them to balance a book, to buy forward, to hedge, and to match if they don't know what you as a developer are going to do. So it's unlikely that you'll be able to negotiate a very hard-hitting break right, which is unilateral in your favour. Flexi PPAs are very much all the rage. Flexi in terms of the ability for the generator to fix a power price according to a flexible market. Some love a fixed price for the duration of the PPA. Others would much prefer the ability to fix according to from the outset, or maybe as they go along seasons or years ahead. Change in law provisions, don't get me started. That's our favourite negotiation, I think, on a PPA. How can you predict the future? How can you draft to cover a change in law that happens next year, let alone in 5 years and 10 years' time? Floor price, all the rage again. Banks love floor prices. Developers and equity not so interested in floor prices, but shrug their shoulders. Got to have a floor price, keep the banks happy. Unfortunately, off-takers are biting back. They're saying, okay, we'll give you a floor price, but we're worried. We're worried that it could be called. Even though it might be 20, 25, 30 pounds a megawatt hour, we're worried it could be called. And if it's called, we, the off-taker, will lose money. We don't like losing money. So why don't we have a clawback mechanism? If it's called, we will pay you, generator, but we want the ability to claw back those payments over time, perhaps at the end of the term. And indeed, we'll extend the PPA's term unilaterally in order to get that money back. That's one way I've seen the approach. That's quite a familiar way in the market. Another off-taker is saying, tell you what, we'll give you a floor price, but we'll also give you a cap on prices. So we're giving you a nice flexi PPA, but the moment you get up to a nice high price, we're going to stop you there, we're going to cap you there, we're not going to pay any more than a capped price, which sounds fine today, but in 5-10 years' time, will that be as effective? So, be aware of that. Separate power and ROC agreements, that's quite an interesting play we're seeing in order to spread the covenant strength issue, which I alluded to. So you've got two off-takers, a bit messy, but where some off-takers are just not interested in buying ROCs or buying half of the ROCs you produce, you may be forced down that route. And finally, just as an observation, it's a horrible one really, negative prices. Some off-takers are now saying, if prices go negative, I'm afraid you, the generator, have to pay me, the off-taker. And that doesn't half stick in the throat, it just feels counterintuitive. But if the prices are negative, and they have gone negative for the odd half hour, then that's what most PPAs now say. Try explaining that to a bank or an equity provider. Briefly, a reminder that we're moving from a ROC regime to CFDs. This is all very familiar to people, so I won't dwell on this. Timetable, March 2017, it all changes over. We're all fine till then, so carry on. You have a choice. It's a dual track system. Do you want ROCs? Do you want CFDs? And that's part of the challenge. Which one do you go for? Beyond then, subject to grace periods, that's it. You've got to go for CFDs if you're currently in the ROC system. FITs carry on separately, but ROCs will then cease for new projects. Fixed price ROCs, do you remember them? The proposal that in 2027 we move to a simpler system of fixed price ROCs, which almost turns it into a sort of feed-in tariff guaranteed certificate that you get. The detail of that hasn't been worked through. The market was really thrown by just 2 lines in the consultation which last year that said the government is thinking about bringing it forward to 2017. Those 2 lines cost tens of thousands of pounds, much heartache and much delay. Why? Because all the PPAs that were written at that time, when there was that uncertainty, had to cover the possibility that fixed ROCs were coming in 2017. Government said no. Sorry, it's 2027, so relax everybody. They will come in, and your PPA still needs, certainly if it's of that duration, to cover the introduction of a fixed ROC scheme. So, getting a CFD. Initial thoughts. It's a reminder, really, that just getting a CFD is not quite the same as getting ROCs. It's all subject to the levy control framework. It's just a reminder that there's a defined pot here. It's not a limitless pot. You've all heard of the 7.6 billion, is it, that's available in 2020 for the low carbon pot from the levy control framework. It sounds a lot of money, doesn't it? But it's spread over all low carbon technologies, and it's not just for new entrants. It's for all those existing projects that have been grandfathered and are gradually eating into that pot. Quite how that pot is going to be split between technologies and with solar in particular, whether we're going to have minimum and maximum allocations under CFDs, we are waiting to hear with great interest. Because until the pot is split, then you are swimming in the same sea as everybody else. And the real worry will be that if solar doesn't happen to be the most cost-effective technology to ensure that the budget is spent most effectively from a Treasury perspective, then we're all going to have a very hard time because other technologies are going to be there ahead of solar. So watch that space very carefully. Maximum minimum budgets, the hypothecation of part of the budget for solar projects going forward. State aid rules, they are a problem. They are a real problem in Whitehall at the moment. Whitehall is constrained, of course, by European state aid rules. And the real focus is moving towards competitive price discovery processes and to a minimum cost, a most effective cost, rather than simply throwing money at new technologies. And therefore, inevitably, constrained allocation and auctioning is going to come through strongly, even if there are small wins that the solar industry and the renewables industry has in relation to auctioning and in relation to the pots that are available. The direction of travel is towards constrained allocation and auctioning. We've got to get used to it. It's tough. It's back to the old NOFO days. It's tough, but it's coming, and we just have to accept it. It could even be that mood will pervade other renewables, subsidies. Who knows? We've been told ROCs are not going to be messed around with. Who knows? The government have said similar things on FITs before. There's no guarantee in this business. If there's pressure from Europe to get prices down, to use public funds effectively, it could be that there will be pressure in other ways. So constrained allocation certainly here shortly and will be here to stay. Timetable, we are well in the planning arrangements now. The final details of auctioning are expected in the summer. Legislation finalised July. First CFD application process, that'll kick off round about October, and we can expect the first contracts to be awarded late this year. This topic, if it's covered next year, same time, we will be talking about how they are actually working in practice. Some key issues for CFD allocation, just briefly going over some of these. You've got to be eligible, obviously. No surprises there. Just one point to watch. Not only do you have to have planning in the bag, but you need connection, and then there's a little bit of uncertainty as to exactly what you do need in terms of, is it a connection offer or is it a full connection agreement? And there's a massive difference, obviously, between the two. And the REA, in their response to consultation, has actually said, we're not sure what's intended here. There's lots of square brackets around the relevant provisions. There's a massive difference in terms of cost and resource between an offer and a contract. So very much watch that space. Frequency of allocation rounds, again the REA is saying, please can we go to a quarterly allocation round? Let's keep this churning, or at worst a 6-month allocation round, because otherwise we could have a big cliff edge where the industry just holds its breath, everybody piles in together, and then a lot of people fall off the cliff edge at the end of, say, a yearly process. Quarterly, more work and more complexity, but certainly the REA's thought is that will assist greater stability, greater churn, and greater openness of the market. Uncertainty, inevitably there is. There's no guarantee of success. If you apply for ROCs today, and as long as you haven't got a diesel generator attached to your solar plant, or you don't do something naughty, you'll get it. You'll get your RO accreditation. Tick boxes you get. That's not the regime under CFDs. You'll apply, and you'll be doing this until you hear. And you'll apply with a particular price. You'll have seen the published strike price, and you'll think, I can make my project work at that. That's good. I like that. But that may not be the price that you'll have put in your sealed bid, because the government is encouraging you to put in a lower price, because it's the lower prices which will be more guaranteed to get a CFD in the first place. You will not know whether you will get a CFD. So what price to bid? The $64,000 question. What price will you bid? If you know 120 is a kind of starting position, what price do you put in? Anybody got an idea? I'd love to know. And actually, will you talk to each other about it? You might actually find that that's a very difficult conversation to have. Why on earth should you? Because that's confidential. That's market knowledge. Why are you going to share what you're bidding? In fact, you will probably definitely not talk to each other. So you won't have transparency on what everybody else is putting in. And therefore, do you remember NOFO? Is anybody as old as I am here? Remember NOFO, non-fossil fuel obligation? Well, just a bit of nostalgia. We've done this before, okay? This is not new. The NOFO instrument, the government contract, bids, auctions, sealed bids, etc. Sounds familiar? That happened in the 90s. It worked brilliantly to begin with, fantastic. NOFO 1, NOFO 2, wonderful prices. Then it went downhill and it went off the edge of the cliff. The government are very well aware of that, don't want that to be repeated, but it is a very similar competitive instrument. And who knows how that will work its way through. There is complexity. It is really difficult. I can't sort of overemphasize that. It's hard work. The DEC slide pack, I don't know if anybody's been along to the DEC lectures on CFDs. They're very good, but the DEC slide pack, the ones that just summarize the legislation and the thinking, that's 88 slides. And, there is a lot of detail in there. It's hard work. Flexibility. There will be plenty of options for flexibility. Putting in multiple bids for the same project, that sounds really complicated, doesn't it? How do you work that out? You put in different prices, but perhaps what you do is you put in a 10 megawatt bid at a particular price, and then you put in, for the same project, an 8 megawatt bid at a different price or the same price, or possibly in a different delivery year, so as you throw it all in and you keep your fingers crossed that they'll like one of them. Flexibility with complexity. And finally, fairness between applicants. I think that the huge question is that in this room will be represented the biggest players who will have very substantial resources, who will probably engage one or two people to work on this strategy exclusively, who are incredibly clever and can crunch financial models. Terrific, you need it. There'll be others in this room, independent generators, smaller developers, possibly single project developers, who won't have that ability, who will not know how to bid into the system, and really will be left in a much greater level of uncertainty. And there's also economies of scale. How can a 50 megawatt solar park, it should, by definition, be more cost effective than a 5 megawatt. There's no distinction in the bidding system between the size of projects. It's just the ultimate price that matters. We haven't got time really to go through the small print. I'm just going to pick a few at random given time. But do read the small print, very interesting. 350 pages of it, terrific stuff. Keeps you awake at night. I made the mistake of printing it off 4 sheets, 4 pages per sheet, thinking I was saving paper, being environmentally friendly. Talk about small print, I could barely read it at all. But there's some really important stuff in there. Just taking a couple at random. Milestone requirements. You've got to show that you've spent, this is to ensure that a project is properly progressing. You can't just get a CFD and sit on it. You will lose it unless you progress your project with windows, long stop dates and milestones. Milestone requirements, you've got to show that you've spent at least 10% of your estimated total project cost by a particular date, or evidence of the timely progress on construction documents, supply documents, etc. Partial commissioning, that has developed quite well. You now need to show that at a particular milestone, you have the ability to adjust downwards by up to 25% of capacity, which is really quite an attractive option, without being penalised. And then at the start date, you've got to deliver that, or at least within 95% of that, in order not to have your CFD taken away from you. And so the small print goes on, good old change in law is there, termination rights, generator credit support. That has actually moderated pretty effectively. So if you're a good generator and you pay the CFD counterparty on time, then you don't need to give credit support. It's only if you default 3 times in a row that you would have to give credit support, which is very good news. CFD counterparty limited recourse, just remember that if they don't pay you, you can't sue them, you can't terminate them. You know, imagine if you had a mortgage like that, where if they, you know, if you felt one day you didn't need to pay your mortgage provider, that you could just say, sorry, I haven't got enough money this month, I might pay you later, and the mortgage provider says that's fine, we can't do a thing about it. That is the position, strictly, under a CFD. But don't probe that too much. I'm sure they'll pay. They're nice people, and I'm sure they're good for the money. So finally, pros and cons, just to summarize. Yeah, CFDs should be simpler. They should be much simpler. It's a very simple concept. If you're short in the market, we'll top you up from reference price to strike price. But, and I've gone through some of the complexities, I won't repeat them, it is a complicated mechanism. Bidding for them is complicated, and the uncertainty that goes with them is something that we're all going to have to grow to live with. There's a standardization of contracts. That's great. That is really good news. They may be long, 350 pages, but they're going to be pretty standard. The front end is going to be tailored, but the back end is going to be pretty much untouched. You won't be able to touch them, which is actually quite a relief rather than having to negotiate every time. Greater certainty than ROCs? Absolutely, in terms of price volatility, etc., no carrying forward recycle amounts. You know, ROCs are complicated, they're horrible things, but we've got used to them. They're now familiar. So there is greater certainty, but I've touched on some of the uncertainty. And there's a good deal of change protection in the CFD mechanism. So we could go into those points. Not yet market tested. We really don't know what it's going to be all about. It's an unfamiliar creature on the block. It's a 15-year term rather than a 20-year term. It deals with loss-adjusted meter readings rather than meter readings. And finally, just as a reminder, 2 points. You still need a PPA. Don't forget that. Don't just get a CFD and think you've done that job. And afterwards, I would love to hear from you if you've got an idea as to what strike price you're going to be bidding in if you're playing in the market come this December. Thank you.